Serial killers that are still on the loose. Right now, as you're watching this video, there are people walking around who have killed before and never paid for it. Not suspects, not persons of interest, actual killers. According to the FBI, there may be up to 50 active serial killers in the United States at this very moment. That's not history. That's not theory. That's now. And the part that should bother you the most isn't how violent they were. It's how normal they look. These aren't the faces you see on wanted posters. Many of them were never identified, never arrested, never even officially named. They didn't escape prison. They escaped attention. Their cases went cold, not because there was no evidence, but because the system stopped connecting the dots. Some of them killed once and learned when to stop. Others killed repeatedly and learned how to move. Different cities, different victims, different methods. Same result, no consequences. And here's the uncomfortable truth most documentaries don't tell you. Being on the loose doesn't mean running. It means blending in. It means going back to work, sitting in traffic, standing in line at a grocery store, living an ordinary life after doing something unforgivable. Tonight's video isn't about the serial killers you already know. The ones with documentaries, mugshots, and prison sentences. This is about the ones who never made it that far. The killers whose stories don't end with justice, because justice never showed up. Some of these cases are decades old. Others are still unfolding. Some killers may be dead. Others may be watching this video right now. And that's not speculation. That's the reality of unresolved murder. So for this Halloween special, we're not revisiting monsters from the past. We're talking about the ones the system lost track of. The serial killers who were never caught, never stopped, and in some cases may still be out there. Because the scariest stories aren't the ones with endings. They're the ones that don't. In 1992, a woman opened her shoe store just off a busy interstate. It was the middle of the day, quiet, routine. She was alone, like she had been countless times before. A man walked in. Average height, forgettable face, nothing that triggered alarm bells. He asked a simple question. She led him toward the back. One shot. Execution style. No robbery, no struggle. He walked out and vanished. It didn't stop there. The same thing happened again and again. Different states. Same kinds of stores, same kind of victims, same cold precision. By the time investigators connected the dots, the pattern had already gone cold. The man later labeled the I-70 killer didn't disappear. He didn't flee. He simply stopped being predictable. That's what on the loose really looks like. Years later, 4 women were found in a drainage ditch behind a motel. All sex workers, all strangled, laid out face down, evenly spaced, shoes removed. There were no witnesses, no cameras, no suspects. Whoever did it had time and confidence. The case stalled almost immediately. The killer didn't vanish. The investigation did. This is where the idea of active serial killers breaks down. Many don't escalate. They adapt. They change locations, change routines, or age out of opportunity. From the outside, it looks like the threat ended. In reality, nothing was resolved. In Jennings, Louisiana, 8 women were murdered and dumped in swamps and canals. They knew each other. Some were police informants. Locals whispered. Families begged. No one was ever charged. They didn't escape prison. They escaped accountability. Because being on the loose doesn't mean running. It means blending in, waking up, going to work, and never being caught. In the early 1990s, police across several states were investigating murders that didn't appear connected. Different towns, different departments, different victims. Each case sat in its own file, tragic but isolated. And that separation was exactly what allowed the person responsible to keep killing. The victims shared quiet similarities: women working alone, small retail stores, daytime hours, ordinary shifts in places where nothing ever happened, until it did. The killer didn't rush. He didn't rob them. He didn't assault them. He spoke calmly, led them toward the back of the store, and shot them once in the back of the head. Clean, controlled, almost procedural. Then he walked out. There were no witnesses, no clear motive, no reason at the time for departments to compare notes. Interstate data sharing was limited, and even as technology improved, these cases were already scattered across years and miles. The connection only emerged when someone finally looked at the map. Every murder had taken place just minutes from the same highway, Interstate 70, a road stretching from Utah to Maryland, thousands of miles, thousands of exits, the perfect corridor for someone who never wanted to stay long enough to be remembered. That's when investigators realized they weren't chasing isolated crimes, they were chasing a pattern. But patterns don't just help police, they teach killers. One of the most disturbing moments in the I-70 case came when the routine broke. In one store, the killer expected to find a woman alone. Instead, there were two people present. Rather than leave, he killed them both. It was the only double homicide in the series, and after that, the pattern changed again. That part rarely makes headlines. Killers adjust. When something works, they repeat it. When something draws attention, they abandon it. Patterns are feedback. Years later, in an entirely different case, another pattern surfaced, only after it was already over. In the West Mesa Desert outside Albuquerque, hikers found bones rising from the sand. Police uncovered the remains of at least 11 women and girls buried in the same remote area. Some were sex workers, some were homeless. One was 15, one was pregnant. There were no crime scenes left, no witnesses, no timelines. Whoever buried them chose isolation on purpose. The pattern was obvious. The response came too late. Serial killers don't survive because patterns don't exist. They survive in the gap before those patterns are seen. Between jurisdictions, between years, between victims, society doesn't rush to protect. By the time the system understands the shape of what happened, the person responsible has already moved on, and the pattern becomes just another thing recognized too late. In 2009, a man hiking in the West Mesa Desert outside Albuquerque noticed something protruding from the ground. At first, he thought it was trash. Then he got closer. It wasn't plastic. It wasn't wood. It was bone. Human bone. When police began digging, they didn't find a single body. They found many. By the end of the excavation, the remains of at least 11 women and girls had been recovered. One was 15 years old. One was pregnant. By the time they were found, justice was already years behind. Investigators believe the murders occurred between 2001 and 2005. Whoever was responsible chose the location deliberately. The bodies were wrapped, buried, and placed far from neighborhoods and roads. The desert did what it does best. It erased evidence, time, and urgency. Most of the victims lived on the margins. Some were sex workers. Some were homeless. Some struggled with addiction. When they disappeared, there were no headlines, no press conferences, sometimes barely a report. Their absence didn't trigger alarms. It created silence. By the time anyone realized these women were connected, their killer was gone. The same silence appeared years earlier in Jennings, Louisiana. Between 2005 and 2009, 8 women were murdered and dumped in canals and swamps outside town. They all knew each other. Some were poor, some were sex workers, some were police informants. Families pleaded for answers. Locals whispered about corruption and protection, but no one was ever charged. What makes these cases unsettling isn't just the number of victims. It's how modern they are. Phones existed, records existed, surveillance existed, And still, women vanished one by one without resolution. Each disappearance could be explained away on its own. A relapse, a runaway, a risky lifestyle. Explanations that delay urgency just long enough for evidence to decay. Serial killers don't just exploit vulnerability, they exploit invisibility. And when no one is forced to look closely at who's missing, patterns sink into the ground, right along with the truth. Sometimes, even discovery comes too late to change anything. In the Jeff Davis 8 case, the most disturbing evidence wasn't found in the swamps. It was buried in paperwork, missing follow-ups, delayed reports, leads that quietly died on desks. Several of the women had contact with local law enforcement before they were killed. Some were informants, some had given names, some warned officers they were being threatened. None of it stopped what came next. Over 4 years, 8 women were murdered in the same small Louisiana town. Their bodies were dumped in canals and swamps just outside Jennings. Whoever did this knew the area. They knew where bodies could sit unnoticed. Locals recognized the pattern long before authorities officially did. Families talked, rumors spread, but on paper the cases stayed separate. Even after investigators suspected a connection, progress stalled. Jurisdictional confusion slowed coordination. Evidence was thin. Witnesses were afraid or unreliable. And every delay made the next murder easier. Years later, the same erosion appeared in Albuquerque. When the West Mesa bodies were found, outrage followed. How could so many women vanish without intervention? The answer wasn't one catastrophic failure. It was dozens of small ones. Missing persons reports that didn't trigger urgency, assumptions about lifestyle, cases labeled low priority. By the time law enforcement saw the pattern, the crime scenes were gone. The evidence was skeletal. Time had done its work. In both cases, the system didn't collapse. It wore down. Failure doesn't usually look like a cover-up caught on camera. It looks like waiting, files passed along, leads put off, the belief that there will be time later. But serial killers don't wait. And once enough time passes, justice stops being a question of effort and becomes a question of whether it's even possible anymore. Interstate highways were built to connect the country. Long, efficient corridors meant to move people quickly. But for some killers, those same roads became cover, a way to arrive, kill, and disappear without ever staying long enough to be noticed. In the early 1990s, the murders linked to the I-70 killer shared more than a method. They shared geography. Every crime happened just minutes from the same interstate. Different towns, different states, different police departments. Each one saw a single crime, never the larger pattern. And the highway made sure the killer was gone before anyone thought to look beyond their own map. That road stretches more than 2,000 miles. Thousands of exits. Thousands of places to blend in. By the time investigators connected the dots, the person responsible had already adapted or stopped leaving anything recognizable behind. The same logic played out elsewhere. In the West Mesa desert, bodies were buried in a place designed by nature to erase timelines and evidence. In Louisiana, canals and swamps delayed discovery and blurred details. Different landscapes, same effect. Geography doesn't just hide crimes, it delays urgency. A missing person near a highway could be anywhere by nightfall. A body in water can go unnoticed for days. A burial in the desert might surface years later. Each environment creates blind spots, and killers who understand them don't need to outsmart technology. They just need to choose the right place. Once you see it, the pattern is hard to ignore. Many killers remain unidentified not because they were brilliant, but because distance, terrain, and time did half the work. The emptiest places aren't always empty by accident. Sometimes they're the plan. By the mid-2000s, the world was saturated with cameras, phones, and databases. DNA was routine. Surveillance was everywhere. The idea of a serial killer repeating the same crime the same way over and over was becoming unsustainable. But the killers didn't vanish. They adjusted. In Brazil, between 2007 and 2008, at least 13 gay men were shot in the head across São Paulo. The murders were fast, precise, and frighteningly consistent. The media called it the Rainbow Killer. What terrified people wasn't just the pattern. It was who police suspected. Authorities openly admitted the killer might be a police officer, someone who knew how to move unseen, how to avoid cameras, how to blend into public space. An officer was arrested after witnesses placed him at multiple crime scenes. For a moment, it felt like the end. Then the case collapsed. He was acquitted. The killings were never solved. Whether he was guilty or not, one thing was clear. The trail stopped. Elsewhere, adaptation took different forms. In Japan, poisoned drinks left on vending machines killed 13 people without confrontation, witnesses, or a visible suspect. In Russia, a killer taunted police with drawings while hiding bodies in abandoned buildings, confident enough to know he wouldn't be caught. Modern serial killers didn't rely on repetition. They relied on disruption, changing methods, changing locations, using systems and trust as weapons. Technology didn't end them. It taught them when to stop, when to shift, and when to disappear. They didn't beat the system in one moment. They survived it by adapting. For a long time, it was comforting to believe serial killers belonged to the past. The 70s, the 80s, a less connected world. But some of the most disturbing cases aren't relics. They're recent, and some are still unfolding. In Mexico, a stretch of federal highway now known locally as the Highway of Death has become a graveyard. Since 2022, at least 70 people have been found murdered along the road. Survivors described abduction, torture, and abandonment. Authorities suspect cartel involvement in many cases, but they've admitted something more unsettling. Not every killing fits that explanation. Some may be the work of individuals hiding inside the chaos. The road is long, poorly monitored, and the violence hasn't stopped. In Canada, Highway 16 tells a slower story. For more than 50 years, women and girls, many indigenous, have vanished along the route. Over 80 victims, some confirmed murders, others never found. No single killer. No final resolution, just disappearance stretched across generations. Elsewhere, the pattern repeats in different forms. In Arkansas, a series of fatal stabbings between 2020 and 2021 ended with no arrests. In Mexico's Sinaloa state, bodies appeared marked with toy cars, vigilante-style executions that sent a message without revealing a culprit. In Pakistan, 4 teenage boys were buried together, murdered in different ways, with no suspect ever named. In Mali, ritual beheadings claimed at least 10 lives over 4 years without arrests. And in Kenya, a man known as Vampire murdered dozens of women, was arrested, then escaped custody. These aren't legends. They're modern cases in a world of cameras and databases. And yet the outcome keeps repeating. No closure, no answers, no justice. Serial killers didn't disappear. They adapted. And some of these stories may not be finished yet. The most disturbing question isn't whether it happened. It's whether it's still happening now.